How do you start off a video about somebody's life? We're talking about memories and families and dreams and history.
Joy, 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 joy. Stay close to me.
Well, I had two girlfriends, Dickie and Jeree, and they both went to our church, and we had a lot of fun together. We'd go home with one of them. I'd go home with one of them. I could walk to one of their houses, although it was a mile, but people did walk in those days. It didn't matter that you were alone. You could walk a mile on the highway without having any worry. Dickie lived, probably a couple of miles, maybe 3 miles from church. We lived right next door to the church. And I would go to her house sometimes on Sunday. And Jeree, I would just walk to her house whenever Mother would let me. So those were my fond memories of my friends. And then we played a lot outside, my brothers and sisters, and we played kick the can and run and hide and seek. And there was a creek down not too far from our house, maybe, it would be probably 3 city blocks away. And we had a big rock and 2 trees. The 2 trees were our door to our house, and we played house in there. And then there, on the other side of the creek, there was a big stone that was kind of it was kind of bumpy, and we played on that a lot. So that, and my little Jeree friend one day decided to go in the pool, in one of the little pools by the creek, and go swimming. And about that time, her dad came up and took her home with a switch behind her back. And but we were allowed to go into the creek, and nobody drowned in the creek that I know of. But today, I don't think parents would let their children go down and play in the water without some supervision. But we were able to play and run and hide and whatever we wanted to do.
Stay close to me. Watch out for the crazy people running around, talking such a world of doubt. Be close to me. Let my tenderness seep deep inside you.
We had a cow and some chickens and a pig and a big garden. So we had so much to eat, and it was a good time in my life. And with the church right next door, we didn't have very far to go to services. Sylvia was the oldest, and she was really quiet, but Mother gave her quite a bit of responsibility of taking care of us. And she was a good person, a loving person. And Louis and I fought some. We were real close to the same age, and so we would fight. But we also played together. We played with knives. You take a knife and play nimbly pick or something like that. I've forgotten exactly what they call it, but you'd flip the knife and see if it'd stick down or stick this way, and you got certain points for whichever way it stuck.
Be close to me. Let my loneliness inform you just how sweet our love will be.
Well, when we moved to Pasadena, Randall was born, the baby. And we were inseparable. Mother and Dad would let me stay home on Wednesday nights to take care of him because he was kind of a handful. And so I would volunteer to stay home and take care of him. And he always had to have his blanket. every night. So we'd be out looking all over the yard for his blanket because he carried it everywhere he went. And his banky, he called it. And I suppose someone is told that when he was little, he would take all of his clothes off. I guess he wet his bed. When he got up in the morning, he'd take his clothes off and climb over the gate. It was a good-sized gate, and go up 2 doors to the neighbor's house. And I guess he knocked on the door. Anyway, they let him in, and we were all asleep, and put some clothes on him. They had children who were older than him, and they had leftover clothing, so they'd send him home clothed, or one of us would go get him and bring him home. He didn't do that every morning, I suppose, but he did it often enough. And that would have been dangerous. And now that would be dangerous, and probably wouldn't happen either. So Randall and I, though, were very, very close. We used to play together. I would play cowboys with him, and I was 11 when he was born, so I was an older child. And we would play games or whatever. And Mother and Dad left him with me or us older children quite a lot because they were doing the Lord's work and ministering. And so he, I guess, was the one that I was the closest to at that time. Joanne, we teased her because she was the baby for so long. And she was always a good kid. Got along well with Joanne. But I kind of bossed her around until one day she said, I asked her to do something, and she says, "You're not my boss. I'm not going to do anything for you anymore." Something to that effect. And so that was the end of that. I didn't have her to boss around anymore, or to go get me a drink or whatever it is I wanted. So that ended that good thing. We got along fairly well for siblings, and had a lot of good fun. We played together. We didn't have as many friends there, and it was more city-like than the country. And so our friends were at school, and we saw them at school, but we didn't go to their house, and they didn't come to our house like they did when we were in a small town.
Joy, joy, joy. Joy, can this be all we are? Can this be all we are and all we'll ever be? Love and joy, you and me, joy.
Well, I remember that we went, when we went to see Grandma, who lived in Shawnee. That was probably about 80 miles. It was a good-sized trip for those days. And we would stop sometime in one of the little towns before we got there, about midway, and we'd get a hamburger. And that hamburger was the most delicious thing, because in the town where we lived, they didn't have a hamburger place or a restaurant. They had a store. This is when I was in grade school. And they had a big store that sold everything that was sold in that town, because there's only one. And they sold gas, and they had a telephone where you could make calls from, and they had food and clothing and just everything you could think of that you might need. And we always liked to go to Grandma's house. She had a basement, and she had all of her newspapers had paper dolls in them. So we would sit down in the basement, and it was cool down there in the summer, and we would cut out paper dolls, and then we would cut out the dresses for them, and we would dress the dolls and play with them for hours at a time. And her basement was just a wonderful place. And it was always fun going to Grandma's. Another thing that, this was Mother's mother, another thing that they had was a car that you could get in the trunk and go through to the car part, because it had a little door or something. I don't remember. I guess that's what it was. But we'd crawl through there and we'd play in that car sometime. They also had a cherry tree that I remember. We would go sit in the cherry tree and eat cherries. That was fun because we didn't have a lot of fruit because fruit was very expensive. And so we liked to go to Grandma's house. And my aunt, who lived there, had a good job. And so we liked to see what interesting things she had. She had some bobbleheads. And in those days, bobbleheads were very unusual. We didn't get to play with one. We had to be very careful, though, to not hurt her, not damage them. But we always liked to go to Grandma Heron's house. And let's see, what else did we like to do? Well, we would go to the big town, which was Hilton. We later lived there when I was older. And we had a movie theater, which we couldn't go to because that was a sin at that time. And so we would go to town, though, and we'd sit in the car and talk about the people that walked past, make fun of them or laugh about them or say they were nice looking or whatever us kids could think of. And that's the way we entertained ourselves. Or we could go to the drugstore and maybe have something special like a Coke. Or we didn't have much money to spend, so most of our money went for food or clothing or things that you need in that respect. But we always had plenty to eat. And we had a happy family. When I was older, we moved to California, and Dad had told us something funny. He said when he came back and told us we were moving, he told us that the flies didn't light. They just flew in the middle of the room back and forth, and they didn't get on your food or anything. They just flew around. But when we got out there, we found out that everything wasn't totally wonderful. He didn't make a very big salary there because the church was really new. He was the third pastor, and the other two were only there for short periods of time. So in reality, he really started the church. But I wouldn't want to say that out loud where anybody who thought they started it would hear it. But it was a big struggle. The church was. We met over a bar. Now, if I remember rightly, on the main street of town in Pasadena, California, we would have to go upstairs. Well, wasn't necessarily a bar. Upstairs they had dances. Downstairs they sold liquor. So we would go upstairs on Sunday morning and clean up the beer bottles and whatever else was there, and put down chairs and have church, and then we would take the chairs up and move them back to where we got them, and that's the way we worshiped in the first building. And then we had another building, and we moved as we grew as a church. We moved to different places. One place is when I was about probably 14, we lived in a building, the church building, and on one side was our house. On the other side was the church, but the church met in our house too. So every Sunday morning we would have to clean it up, which wasn't much fun, dust and clean and get everything all ready for the church service. And that was interesting. And then the church bought a big house across, let's see, it was down a little bit from the church, but on Oak, this was Villa and Oak, and down on Oak, they bought a 2-story building, and the church met there part of the time. The youth would meet over there, and some of the other Sunday schools would meet over there. And we moved in there. It was kind of creaky, though. It was so big that at night it settled, and it made creaking noises, and it kind of scared me. I almost was ready to go to church on Wednesday night instead of taking care of Randall, because it's kind of scary there alone with just Randall. And but that was an interesting place to live. I had a room upstairs, clearer kind of to the back. My bedroom was up there, so it was nice. It was private, and the folks were downstairs. So, and there was a kitchen upstairs too. It had been an apartment, I guess, a place for 2 families to live, but we lived there. And then the church traded that, and with some more money, for a lot and a house down on Oak Street, about a block and a half away. And we had several other churches. Well, at that time, though, when Dad left that church, the next pastor led the people to sell that lot, and that we were going to build a church on, a new church. He felt like we should have a church already built because of the church's size, so he led them to sell that property. And then the pastor still lived in the house where we lived next to that lot. So when Mel was out of the service, he was in the service for a while, and when he got out of the Army, he came back, and we were married. We had dated during the time that we lived in Pasadena, and I was about 14 and 15. We dated with a group. We didn't date alone, but we had a few dates when I was 15 or 16, I guess. And so we had gone back to Oklahoma, and this time I was 17 and 18, and then when he got out of the service, I was 19. He was 23, and we got married. And we came back to Pasadena to live. And his family were all from there. He was born in Pasadena. And I joined the church again, where Dad had begun. And it met in a building that they had bought. So one day after we had been married for a year, we lived in a rental for that year, and then we wanted to buy a house. So we talked to one of the ladies in the church who was a realtor, and she showed us some houses in our price range of about $9,000, and they were pretty badly beat up, some of them, although they could have been fixed up. And so I told her, I said, I really liked that house over there where we lived when Dad was pastor. And she said, well, the church just voted to put it up for sale last night. So we took a look at it, and we decided that we would buy it. So we still live there after we've been married almost 61 years. Just in this month will be 61 years. And we lived there for 60 years. So the house is still there, and the Lord gave it to us, so we just stay there. We really love that house. We were married for quite a while and didn't have any children. We were married for about 7 years before we had children, and finally I kind of gave up. I just figured, well, One of my best friends, Marion, and Everett didn't have children, and they seemed to be adjusting all right. So I decided that it was okay, and then I got pregnant. We had been praying, of course, for children, and I wanted boys. So we had a boy named David. After 5 years, our younger son, Randall, was born, and we thought our family now was finished, and it was. We had the two boys. And we had a lot of wonderful times, good times, serving the Lord there at that church. And then the Lord called me into Child Evangelism, and I worked there for 20 years. I didn't, not all of that time was I attending. I put, for 10 of those years, well, for 20 of the years, I put on the story. They put on a story on the telephone, and we would give an invitation. We'd change it about every other day. And two of us did it for a while, and then I was doing it by myself for a long time. And we don't know what the Lord did through that. I taught teachers for a while too, and Mel, my husband, helped. He made the backgrounds for me, the backgrounds of trees and whatever that was on there, green grass and everything, so that we could teach the story. I would teach the story. Randall went with me quite a while, our youngest son, because I was doing that then. We also had foster kids. I forgot to tell you about that. When Randall was 3, we started working for the Department of Adoptions, and the babies would come to our house right out of the hospital, sometimes at 3 days old and sometimes older. We did that for quite a few years. We had 17 or 18 babies. The children began to get older, and that's when when the Lord told me that I should stop taking care of these babies and start working for Child Evangelism. So I had to go back and put that in. That's what I had done. And then Mel got laid off from his job. He would show up for work, and if he worked, he'd get paid, and if he didn't, we still had a good salary, but I felt a little insecure, and so I stopped doing Child Evangelism work at that time. I still put the story on, but I began to be the church custodian. We had a new building by this time up at the church, and I did a good job, I have to admit, and Mel would help me when he wasn't working, so we both actually did the job. But it was a good time. It was like going to church every day, and I really did enjoy it. And the Lord did a lot of things. We had a big church for a while, a good-sized church, maybe 250, 300 members. That was big for us out in California. And then sometimes we didn't have very many people. But the Lord worked miracles. We saw the miracles of the Lord. Some healings and some direction. The Lord used some interesting ways to show us what He wanted us to do.
this question is, do you have anything you want, any message, anything you want to tell your children, your grandchildren, your potential, future grandchildren, so forth? Anything you want to say?
The main thing in life is to believe in the Lord Jesus Christ as Savior, of course, and to be ready to serve Him while you're still on this earth. And we all make mistakes, and I have made my mistakes, and sometimes I'm too flippant, and I'm going to stop being that way. And so we need to trust the Lord and with all our might, and lean not on our own understanding, and acknowledge Him in everything that we do. So that's what I want you to know, to trust Jesus as your Savior. And I hope there's somebody in the family that can still tell you how. Your uncles can, and if not, find a pastor who can help you. That's the main message I want. And live a good moral life. And follow the Bible, the instructions of the Bible. As you know, we have 10 commandments in the Bible and other things that God tells us to do. And these are not suggestions. They're called commandments. So read the Bible and find out what they are, and then follow God.
Is that it?
That's it.
Anything else you want to say?
No, I think that covers it.
Alrighty.
Okay, great.
It was like going to the doctor and getting a shot. Now it's all right.
He set me free. What? He set me free after I told my great grandkids what I wanted to say.